I see this with a lot of people, you know, where you come from a background where your parents or, you know, your aunts and uncles, like, and, you know, you even grew up in like doing blue collar work. And like you said, everything was an hourly rate. And so those are like your standards and your expectations. And it's kind of hard to break that cycle and that mindset. And I think that keeps people stuck for a very long time, is like being brutally honest. Like when you go to charge $1,000 for something, you're like, man, I wouldn't pay $1,000 for this. And if
Yeah,
you wouldn't pay $1,000 for it, you're going to have a hard time trying to sell it to somebody else. So,
right.
you know, I think that it all does start with the mindset, and really trying to have a shift there between being like an hourly worker who clocks in and clocks out at a job versus like, this is a business and I'm going to treat this as such.
Yeah, and another thing, going back to what you just said, was about like how I was talking to people, right?
Yeah.
Because when people call me on the phone, I know if I'm talking to somebody and I'm going to spend that much money, like I want to know that that person is competent, right? So that's what was going through my head, the whole time I'm talking to these clients, right? So, they tell me what the issue is, and I tell them like, this is how I'm going to fix it. These are the things I'm going to do. This is why this stuff works.
Mm.
And I was just wasting a lot of time, essentially running them through like the entire process of
Yeah.
essentially how to train a dog over the phone. And
Right.
you're like, hey man, like,
I remember this. Yeah.
it's going to be much better if you, keep it like more kind of like goal oriented, because, these people, number one, they don't really, either one, they're going to listen to you and then they're going to think that they can do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll never hear back from them, or
Yeah.
they just kind of tone you out and they're like, dude, this dude just won't stop rambling. You
Yeah.
know what I
People.
mean? So
Yeah. They're
I
calling
keep
you. They're
things,
calling. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Zane.
I keep things much shorter now, you know what I mean? And it's more of like a business approach to things instead of like approaching. I feel like if you're approaching clients as a trainer, you're not going to do as well, or you're going to run yourself into the ground. When
Yeah.
I'm talking with clients, I try to be like the business minded,
Yeah, for sure.
the CO and the CEO or owner, you know what I mean? Like whatever. But,
Yeah.
and then when I'm dealing with the dogs, now I can be a trainer,
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? But
That's when you're going to be a
there's,
trainer.
there definitely should be, at least for me, there had to be that difference there. Otherwise, if a trainer is talking to somebody, gosh, dude, it just,
Yeah, I
it's
listen
going to
to
last
so
too
many
long.
different, phone calls, because, we record calls when they come in through ads and stuff like that. And the amount of times, you're exactly right. Like I've heard people fix people's problems on the phone. They're like ready to hand over their credit card and like, hey, I want to do your board and train or your private training program or whatever it is. And they're like, well, have you tried getting a prong collar yet? Or have you tried using a bark collar or this crate or like, whatever it is. And I'm like, you just like are giving them a solution to their issue, or and we all know it's not really a solution, right? Like there's way more to the
Yeah,
story than
right.
just like a quick 5 minute phone call. But at the end of the day, like you've given them enough to put a band-aid on the problem, and they are going to, for a little bit of time at least, think that like, hey, this is something that we can try. We haven't tried this yet. Let's try this training tool or this new method that dog trainer told us. And then it just takes the attention off of working with you. And then they're going to be right back to the same problem in a couple months, but they may not get back in touch with you. They might, but at the end of the day, like what you were saying before, I remember talking about this with you, is like you were doing a lot of problem solving on the phone calls for people and training over a phone call instead of selling them on like you said, being goal oriented and like, hey, we can certainly help with that. Here's the programs that are going to be the best way of accomplishing that.
Yeah. And like, it is a much, I guess if you think of it, if I think of it in a different way, it's much more relatable. You know what I mean? If you can be like, yeah, that really sucks. Like,
Yeah.
I hate when when I go in public and my dog is pulling all over the place. Like, that's something that's more relatable
Oh
than
yeah, man.
like trying to explain to them what classical conditioning and operant conditioning is. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? They're like, okay, I don't see how this has anything to do with
Yeah.
why my dog's lunging at other dogs.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
Um,
because like you say that you're not a good salesman, but like you actually are, because that's a really, really intuitive thing to do with people, which is like sometimes all people want is for somebody to sympathize and empathize with them. Be like, oh, I'm sorry to hear you going through that. It must be really stressful. You know what I mean? Like your dog's growling at people and like you have a newborn in the house, right? And or whatever it is, and they're scared. And it's
yeah,
like you just kind of empathize with them and let them know, like, I see where you're coming from. And Yeah, you're exactly right. Like that's people want to be taken care of in that regard and spoken to that way instead of like, let's talk about the most scientific reason for why this
Yeah,
is happening.
right.